Hitler came into true authoritative power in March 1933. He took over a poverty-stricken, sick, and hopelessly bankrupt state, with over 6 million Germans unemployed. All German gold reserves had been stolen by the victors of World War I as crushing reparation payments. When Hitler kicked out the destructive international banking cabal, he became the only leader in history to arrest a Rothschild. Therefore, he immediately outlawed the debt-based system, i.e. usury, by punishment of death, and created a new Deutschmark that was backed only by productive German physical and intellectual labor. After having deleted the parasitical bankers from the equation, the German economic miracle took off almost immediately. Instead of borrowing from the banks at interest, the government instead created a new monetary system for the Germans called the Labor Treasury Note. Millions of Germans were put to work, and the workers were paid with the treasury certificates. The government issued money was not backed by gold, but it was backed by something of real value. It was essentially a receipt for labor and materials delivered to the government. Hitler managed to end the reparation payments from the Versailles Treaty. He rebuilt Germany into something better than ever, and the nation quickly rose from the ashes and healed its deep wounds. The unemployment problem was solved, and the country was back on its feet. It had a solid, stable currency, no debt, and no inflation. Unemployment went from 50% down to less than 2% in a few short years. After 5 years, Hitler had given 6 million Germans work, and full employment was reached. Crime was almost non-existent, unemployment was a thing of the past, and there were no homeless and no beggars. University students organized a one-time book burning of degenerate Marxist literature and books from the Institute of Sex Research in Berlin on May 10, 1933. The rest of the world, still ruled under the Rothschild cabal, was still in recession. Hitler also relaxed the strict gun control laws of the previous government, allowing the people to defend themselves again. False claims are constantly made that Hitler could take power because he disarmed the German people. But this is nonsense. It was the Weimar government that already had disarmed the German people before. Gun clubs now open all over the Reich. In the eyes of the National Socialists, women were viewed as the preservers of the tribe, the guardians of future generations. Everywhere in Germany, houses and apartments were built for their workers. Villages of small single-family homes were set up. The monthly payments were set so low that practically everyone could afford his own house. All houses were naturally constructed according to the highest standards of public health. Before the end of 1933, Hitler succeeded in building 200,000 buildings in accordance with his building program. Within 4 years, nearly 1.5 million were built for the German people. The monthly rent for a worker was only about an eighth of his monthly earnings. Adolf Hitler was the first person to create a law against the mistreatment of animals, recognizing it to be evil. A law imposing a total ban on animal experiments was enacted. The National Socialists declared an end to the unbearable torture and suffering in animal experiments. Goering announced in a radio broadcast.
The victors, of course, write the history, don't they? They write the history, and they tell us a narrative, and we're supposed to swallow that bullshit as if it's true. The major crime of Adolf Hitler was that he got Germany out of a banking debt that was drowning the German people in a cesspool of moral decay, drowning in debt.
People from all over the world united behind Germany. Many people saw straight through the propaganda that was being launched against Hitler in the media. Hundreds of thousands of Slavic, Russians, Arabs, Asian, Indians, blacks, and even Native Americans wore the eagle and the swastika proudly on their breast. Was in fact the most religiously diverse and largest multiracial fighting force in human history. Volunteers from the following countries joined Germany and fought for the Third Reich: Albania, Australia, Armenia, Argentina, Azerbaijan, Belgium, Bulgaria, Bosnia-Herzegovina, China, Canada, Croatia, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Greece, Georgia, Hungary, India, Indonesia, Iceland, Ireland, Iran, Iraq, Italy, Korea, Latvia, Libya, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Lebanon, Netherlands, North Africa, South Africa, Norway, Poland, Palestine, Portugal, Romania, Serbia and Montenegro, Slovakia, Syria, Slovenia, Spain, Russia, Sweden, Switzerland, United Kingdom, Ukraine, at the American Military University in Virginia, said that these issues of soldiers of Jewish descent was long a somewhat taboo subject, overlooked by most academics.
Toward Moscow and their push toward Moscow. But some stayed back, and we were absolutely convinced that the Germans had come to save us from communism. And never was there any reason for us to change our minds. Why should we? The Germans were heroes in our eyes.
Hitler viewed communism as a poison to Europe and decided that his life's purpose was to root out and destroy it. The Germans had nothing against the Russians as people, but instead against communism. Many Russians volunteered to fight for Hitler instead. Nearly 500,000 Russian volunteers served on the front lines, and another 100,000 or more serving in other non-combat positions. The Churchill and Roosevelt would now push for the US to enter the war. Never before in history were the American people as anti-war or as united in their views as they were in 1939 about staying out of what they saw as yet another European civil war. The Gallup poll showed 94% of the American people was absolutely against participation in the war when it began in September 1939. Never be so good a time to stop the shipment of oil to Japan as we now have. There might develop from the embargoing of oil to Japan such a situation as would make it not only possible but easy to get into this war in an effective way. And if we should thus indirectly be brought in, we would avoid the criticism that we had gone in as an ally of communist Russia, assets in the US, and later forced an oil embargo on Japan in an international act of hostility. As a direct result, Japan now lost access to 75% of our overseas trade and 88% of our imported oil. This led to Japan now having insufficient resources to continuing her war with Communist China. To avoid war, the Japanese first entered into negotiations with US officials. Because the US and Britain now had cracked Japan's naval communication codes, all important Japanese codes were broken. Roosevelt knew about the coming surprise attack, but no warning was sent to the commanders at Pearl Harbor. Attacked the American fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, sinking or heavily damaging 18 ships, including 8 battleships, destroying 188 planes. The attack on Pearl Harbor ignited a sudden press frenzy and a wave of patriotic enthusiasm for entering the war. Roosevelt and the people around him would finally have their world war. The attack was not a surprise. Roosevelt deliberately allowed 2,400 US sailors to die without any warning.
British pilots and the Americans also knew it as terror bombing. They weren't kidding themselves. They knew what they were doing. They were slaughtering women and children down below in the German cities. This was sanctified. It was sanctioned by the British and American governments, this deliberate attempt to kill as many people as possible, a deliberate attempt to scorch from the face of the earth every German city above a certain size, let's say 25,000 people.
In November 1941, Stalin issued Order 0428, stating that communist partisans would dress up in German uniforms, particularly those of the Waffen-SS, and destroy all settlements within a swath of about 40 to 60 kilometer depth from the main battle lines and to ruthlessly kill the civilian population. It was important to leave a few survivors with these attacks who would report the supposed German atrocities. At the Yalta Conference, the plot to reshaping of the post-war world was made. The biggest winner was Stalin. Churchill muttered to Stalin, "We have killed 6 or 7 million Germans, and probably there will be another million or so killed before the end of the war." The Allied commander Eisenhower was in control of over 5 million living enemy soldiers. "It is a pity we could not kill more."
Get that? They would not feed after Germany's surrender. Altogether, the Allies had between 7 and 8 million German prisoners. They captured 4.2 million before the new DEF status, similar to another type, surrendered enemy persons. So, according to the Morgenthau Plan.
To cover up his crimes, Eisenhower issued an order asserting that the Red Cross officials were not allowed access to his death camps.
I think Jim Bach has made a major historical find here. To me, as an American historian, I'm ashamed.